Hello, my name is Todd Long with Leadership Innovations, and I'm here to provide you with an introduction to emotional intelligence, which I'm going to call thoughtful communication throughout this presentation. Now, let me give you a picture of what I think emotional intelligence looks like. Now, I've lived most of my life in the Midwest, but there's been occasion when I've had a chance to go see the ocean and walk along the beach and put my feet into the water and play a little bit in the water. And if you've been like me, as you've walked out into the water, as you've gotten up to your knees or up to your waist, you start to feel what's called the undercurrent. And the undercurrent is this flow of water that goes in different directions and different speed and different forcefulness and strength that's happening underneath the surface. And most of the time, if you're walking in a calm day in the water, everything's okay. But occasionally, that undercurrent becomes really strong. And if that undercurrent actually becomes so strong, it can become very difficult to actually stand or navigate in the water. It can actually pull you under as well and have major problems. So I think about this picture of the undercurrent as the emotions that are constantly taking place in our lives. Most of the time, hopefully, those emotions are steady and stable and we can navigate them pretty well. But occasionally, they become strong, more intense, and they come out of nowhere, and it becomes more challenging to navigate those emotions. So I think about emotional intelligence and this idea of thoughtful communication is really about navigating the undercurrents of life. And that navigation of those undercurrents really is about the intrapersonal communication and the interpersonal communication that we have. Now, intrapersonal communication is the communication that's happening inside ourselves. It's what's going on in our mind and our emotion that's happening at any given moment. And then interpersonal communication is the communication that's happening with other people around us. And so as we're navigating these interactions and this communication with others, we can see emotional intelligence is about building trusting relationships. It's about navigating and communicating with clarity. It's about solving problems with other people. It's about collaborating with other people. It's about motivation of ourselves and others. And it's really about navigating the undercurrent of conflict or tension that might occur in our relationships as well. So as we get into emotional intelligence, there's a value in this in terms of how we interact internally with ourselves and how we interact interpersonally with other people around us. So let's start with understanding emotional intelligence and the definition of emotional intelligence. So emotional intelligence came out of the 1990s from two gentlemen, one Peter Salovey and two John Mayer, and they did some research on what they call and have coined emotional intelligence and give a definition to it. Another person, Daniel Goleman, has a framework that he kind of built off of their work and created his own framework of emotional intelligence. And what I've done is I've looked at those definitions, I've looked at some other frameworks for emotional intelligence and come up with my definition of emotional intelligence based on my research, experience, and understanding of what this is. So here's the definition I'll give you for emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence is the skills and discipline to effectively understand ourselves, others, and the situation well in the moment and respond thoughtfully to achieve meaningful relational and task outcomes. There's some things I want to point out in this definition. First of all, I want to point out this idea of skills and discipline. See, emotional intelligence is about, you can actually build up these skills, but it's also about having the discipline to use those skills at the right time in the right way, which is about the situation. We are able to navigate that situation well and then respond in a way that we have these ideas of relational outcomes and task outcomes come from that. And we'll get into that a little bit deeper later on. So we'll start there with the definition. And then let's look at this thoughtful communication framework, which helps us to have emotional intelligence. So this framework starts with the idea of the power of the pause, where we understand what's happening in us, others in the situation. And then ultimately our goal is to have meaningful outcomes, which we'll look at here in a minute around relational and task outcomes. And in between, we have thoughtful communication, empathy, assertiveness, self-restraint, expressiveness, inquiry, and self-disclosure. Now I'm going to focus on the pause, the outcomes, and the definitions of each of these thoughtful communication skills. So let's start with the power of the pause. The power of the pause is about being able to stop in the moment and understand what's happening in ourselves, what's happening in others around us the best that we can, and the situation that's happening. A number of years ago, while I was standing in line at a sandwich shop, getting ready to order my sandwich, a gentleman behind the counter flailed back, and then flailed forward really quickly, smacked his head on the counter, and then fell backwards on the floor. In that moment, I quickly assessed what's happening in my mind, my emotions, and the situation, and recognized in that moment that I was a little uncomfortable, didn't know exactly what to do, but I made the choice to go around the counter and try to find a way that I could help. As I was coming around the counter, another lady went towards that gentleman who was having a seizure on the floor and began to try to find a way to help him, and I was trying to find a way to help this individual at that moment as well. I don't know a lot about about first aid and taking care of people in these situations, but I do know this, that you don't want to pin them down or try to control them. I know you want to comfort them or find a way so they don't injure themselves anymore. So I communicated with the lady that was in there first. I said, if you can go kind of support his head and find a place to comfort his head, I think that would be good. And then I went to the feet to kind of navigate those a little bit. And another lady went to call 911. So in that particular situation, we kind of gathered a moment where we could navigate the situation well, help this individual in the middle of this seizure not hurt themselves, and wait for help to come. That was a moment where there was self-awareness, other awareness, and situational awareness to try to navigate that particular situation. Fortunately, the gentleman came out of it well. I don't know all the situation, what caused the seizure at that moment, but we were able to navigate it and come away with a person who did not injure themselves anymore and be able to take care of the situation. So I think about that particular situation, but we can have this moment of practicing the power of the pause at any given moment in our lives. It's that moment where we pause and we go, what's going on in my thoughts, in my feelings, and then physically what's happening in my physical awareness at that moment. So if we can know what's happening in our mind, our emotions, and physically around us, it can give us clues and indicators of how to navigate the situation. As well as, it's interesting, is pausing and being as much aware as we can about other people in the situation. What's going on with their thinking and feelings and what's happening in them physically. Now, I can guarantee we're not going to have 100% information on that and interpret that 100% accurately at any given time, but we can find some clues and some indicators if we're willing to stop for just a moment. And then it's also understanding the situation, what's happening in that particular moment, what's happening in the history around that, and how that informs what's happening in the situations to, again, navigate that really well. So this idea of thoughtful communication starts with the power of the pause, understanding what's happening in us, others, and the situation. Next, we have to look at the meaningful outcomes. That's on the other side of this model. And the meaningful outcomes, there's two parts to this. There's one is the relational part, and there's the task part. So in these meaningful outcomes, it's the fulfillment of our desired relational and task expectations. So as we think about any interaction that we have, if we think about this, that we have relational expectations, we have outcomes or task expectations we have in those interactions. So let's go a little bit deeper in this. As we look at meaningful outcomes, we can look at the relational outcomes, which are the closeness and distance of the relationship because of the interaction. And then we have the task outcomes, which are the results of an undertaking. So the relational outcomes have to do with our interaction with the individual. So I want you to think about two people. Think about one person that you really enjoy being around. And then think about a second person that you have more of a challenge or difficulty being around them. So that person that you enjoy being around is what we'd call relational closeness. There's a sense of positive emotional connectedness. There's some open and transparency in the communication. You have shared values and goals. You feel energized by the interaction. There's a sense of trust. Now, the extreme opposite of this is the distance in that a person you might have distance in a relationship with, where there's negative emotional conditions. You're maybe guarded or limited in your communication. There's conflicting values or different goals that show up. You're demotivated by that interaction, and there's a lower level, and there's some distrust in that interaction. Now, as I think about closeness and distance, I really think about it as a continuum. And every single relationship, we're moving in closer or distance in that relationship and navigating how we interact with that person. So if we're willing, as we start to see a relationship, the distance start to show up, if we're willing to, again, pause and find ways to bridge the gap and bring that closeness in that relationship, if that's important, then we can do that. So that's the relational outcomes. Now we have the task outcomes, and the task outcomes are really, again, the results of an undertaking. It's what we get done. It could be implementing a new system. leading a meeting, providing feedback to an associate, loading an outbound truck for delivery, could be designing a website. Anything that we do is the tasks that come into play. Let's put these two aspects of outcomes together and look at what I'll call the outcome matrix. On one side, we have the relationship outcomes, which is the distance or closeness in relationship. And then we have on the other axis, we have the task outcomes. And I would say our goal in this idea of thoughtful communication is to have great relationships and great results. So think about in a work environment where you feel valued and there's important relationships and they're healthy relationships and you're also getting things done, how much more engaging that is, how much more productive you are, how much you want to come to work and actually produce and get things done. And that's the direction we're striving for as a result of having great, thoughtful communication skills. However, sometimes we fall into these different categories where there's poor relationships or poor results because of the distance and we're not getting things done. Or we could fall in this category of we have pretty good relationships, but really we have poor results. We get along pretty well, but we're not getting the stuff done that needs to get done. On the other side of this, there's poor relationships and we're getting good results. What's in that great results? Because I think that has to do with the relationships we have as well. So as you navigate and think about the relationships you have with one another, with the people in your world, you can consider, do I have great relationships, great results, and where do I fit in this matrix? So thoughtful communication starts with the power of the pause, where we understand what's happening in us, others in the situation, and ends with those meaningful outcomes, the relational and task outcomes. And in between, we have these 6 skills of thoughtful communication. The first is empathy, our ability to engage in the experience of somebody else and understand what's happening in them. A second skill set is assertiveness, which is our ability to communicate a clear and confident message with respect and sincerity. A third skill is self-restraint. We control those impulsive reactions that might cause to difficulties or challenges in a relationship and within ourselves. Fourth is expressiveness, the ability to communicate our emotions in a healthy, productive, assertive manner. The fifth skill set is inquiry, which is about asking thoughtful questions to gain deeper understanding. And the sixth skill set is self-disclosure, our ability to communicate information appropriately about ourselves to somebody else. So there's a framework for emotional intelligence and the idea of thoughtful communication. So if you're in one of my courses, we're going to dig deeper into some of these thoughtful communication skills and give you a chance to practice those and get more proficient with them. If you are not in one of my courses where we dig into this, reach out. I'd love to share this with your organization and provide you with a deeper practice and understanding of emotional intelligence. Again, my name is Todd Long with Leadership Innovations. Thanks for listening to this introduction to thoughtful communication, which focuses on emotional intelligence.